I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how we as ministers keep on keeping on with the ministry that God has called us to. But I'm conscious that last year I began by resourcing you with a joke. I think I told you a joke about Quasimodo. Anybody remember that? Yeah. And a number of people said that they wanted to use it, and we had some terrible jokes last night from Andy. So I thought the regional team can do much better than that joke. So I'm going to tell you a little joke to start off this morning. It has a very vague connection to my message. I just admit that right at the start. But there is a vague connection. One day, an inflatable boy goes to his inflatable school. And his inflatable teacher blames him for something else that another inflatable student has done. And so he's sent to the inflatable headmaster. And after a long telling off from the inflatable headmaster, the inflatable boy has had enough. And so he pulls out a pin and sticks it in the inflatable headmaster. And then he runs. And as he's leaving school, he thinks, I hate this school. And he sticks his pin in the inflatable school. And he gets home to his inflatable house. And he runs up the inflatable stairs straight into his inflatable bedroom. And thinking about what he's done, he can't face the consequences. So he takes the pin and sticks it in himself. The next day, the inflatable boy wakes up in the inflatable hospital. And lying in the next inflatable bed is the inflatable headmaster. With a disappointed look on his face, the inflatable headmaster turns to him and says, You've let me down. You've let the school down. But worst of all, you've let yourself down. You see? Isn't that good? That was good. I love that joke. See, there you go. I can use that on Sunday, can't you? Life is not always easy. And the Christian life, we know, is not always easy. I dare say that being a Christian minister at times is not easy. How do we persevere? How do we maintain that enthusiasm? How do we continue to be excited about God? How do we continue to be excited about the church? How do we maintain that commitment that God calls us to have? How do we maintain that missionary zeal that we have? How do we avoid that burning out? How do we avoid growing weary of doing good? How do we keep on keeping on in the ministries that God has called us to? It's not easy. We live in a world, don't we, where there's a growing secularism. We live in a world of aggressive atheism, where well-known scientists write books that help us called the God delusion. We live in a world where people of faith, any faith, I think, are sometimes seen as unusual or strange, maybe even scary. In a world where our traditional Christian beliefs more and more are bringing us into conflict with modern views of morality and lifestyle. It's not easy to be a Christian. It's not easy to be a Christian minister. But in reality, that's nothing new to the church. It's nothing unique to us in our generation. When we read the early church, when we read of the New Testament church, they didn't have it easy either. There was temptations around in their day to give up. They were persecuted for their faith. We know that the letter to the Hebrews was written for that, and I've forgotten to read the scriptures, haven't I? I was so wrapped up in my joke, you see, that's why Spurgeon's were right. But I'm going to read the scriptures for you. Oh, you've let us down. I'm so glad you're still here, Andy. Listen, we're reading from Hebrews. Andy's going to read it in the original Hebrew for us. Greek for us. I'm just going to read a few verses from Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And you have forgotten that word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? Our fathers disciplined us for a little while, as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who've been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. The reason I very fortunately remembered those scriptures at that point was because the letter to the Hebrews was written to a group of people who were experiencing persecution. And they were in danger of giving up their faith, going back to their old Jewish faith. And the writer writes to them because of the persecutions they're going through. We know today that there are many religions out there that claim the secret ways of God. And in many parts of the world today, to be a follower of Jesus, even to say his name, could mean rejection by your family, even persecution by the state. And Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, warned his followers that if we live the life that he calls us to, we will be persecuted. Things will be difficult. What does he say in Matthew 5:11? Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Blessed are you. That's a whole other sermon in itself, isn't it? If we're blessed in that way. So how does the writer to the Hebrews help these New Testament Christians to keep on keeping on? What can he say to us that will help us in our situation? Well, he uses an illustration, doesn't he? It gives this illustration that the life of ministry, the life of faith, is like being in a race. And it's a race that they must finish. Who's seen Forrest Gump? Great movie, isn't it? I love Forrest Gump. But it's a sad movie as well, a bit sad. It's a feel-good movie at the end, but it starts off with a young man who's told he can't run properly. And then it turns out that he has some learning difficulties. He's a young man who's bullied. His best friend moves away, gets called up to war, loses his closest friend. His mother dies. Some years life was pretty hard for Forrest Gump, and it wasn't always easy to keep on. And in one of the worst times of his life, in the movie, we see that he decides to go for a run. You remember that bit? And eventually he runs and runs and runs all the way across America. And in the movie, he overcomes all kinds of trials through a combination of good fortune, sheer determination, and he becomes a very wealthy man. How do we do this? How do we keep on keeping on? How do we keep running the race? Well, Hebrews has some very simple suggestions for us. And as I said to you, I'm not telling you anything new here, folks. But it is good to be reminded, isn't it? We've got to reject that hinders, Hebrews says. Throw off everything that hinders, Hebrews 11 verse 1. In some parts of Italy, they have this strange custom that on New Year's Eve, the striking of midnight, the doors and windows are thrown open, and as midnight strikes, they throw out of the window all kinds of stuff that reminds them of bad things in the past year. So Old bits of crockery, detested ornaments, I like that. Hated furniture, loads of possessions that remind them of something in the past year that they're determined to wipe out of their minds. So stop thinking about that deacon that you'd like to throw out of a window, or that church member that you'd like to throw out of a window. You know, the life of faith is a long-distance run. It's a marathon. And we can have no place in our lives for those things that hinder our performance. Good preparation for the life of faith involves ridding ourselves of the things that would cause us to stumble or stop on that run. Professional athletes are ruthless, aren't they? About the things that they allow into their lives. If they weigh too much, you can say, I'm not a professional athlete. But if they weigh too much, they lose weight. If they need more muscle, they build it up. They get rid of the things that are wrong. But they also control some of the things in their lives that in and of themselves are not wrong, but if taken to excess wouldn't help them. They control their lives. They discipline their mind and their body to achieve the goal. And the athlete who isn't disciplined in that way is going to fail. So too for us as Christian leaders. If we're to keep on keeping on, we have to discipline ourselves. We must get rid of those things that hinder us in our walk with God and in the ministry that He calls us to. And we must be brutal about it. We've got to get rid of those things that hold us back, those things that will not help us to persevere. And it could mean all kinds of stuff, couldn't it? It could mean that you need to get rid of some stuff from your diary. Maybe there's some stuff you're doing that you shouldn't be doing. Because you may be working hard, but you may not be working effectively. It might mean stopping some of those things that you shouldn't be doing. You know, working in the main areas of your calling and gifting. Who does any kind of review with you to say, what is your main area of gifting and calling? Are we as a church making sure that you're working in those main areas? I think it could mean getting rid of unrealistic expectations of ourselves. That we are the answer and have the answer to everybody's question and problem. And actually, that the whole place won't fall apart if we're not there. Colin was saying something about that, wasn't he? Maybe it might mean addressing unhealthy habits that we have. Unhealthy attitudes. We can become quite cynical as church leaders if we're not careful. Being totally radical, you know, it could mean turning your phone off. Not looking at your emails for a whole day, or a whole weekend, or a whole ministers' conference. In session 1, Sean talked about the negativity bias that we have. I found that very interesting, didn't you? That we hold on 80% of our thoughts are negative. I thought, wow, okay. Well, I'm going to show you. I thought, it's great how God works. I hadn't talked with Sean, but I've got this video I want to show you. And it's about a man trying to deal with his negative attitude. It's called Shockingly Negative. And I hope it's a bit of fun. But we'll watch this video now.
Complaint zapper. Zap away your negativity. Okay. Do not use if you're pregnant, have a heart condition, or wear braces. Guess I'm good to go. To test, hold in front and say something negative. Is enough? Boy, this weather really stinks. Yikes. Whatever it takes. It's not very comfortable. Turn down the intensity a little bit. Let's give this thing a test run.
Man, it is freezing out today. Okay, you know what? Stating a fact. Oh, stating a fact.
Boy, this coffee is terrible.
Don't freeze up on me now, you lousy. What's this? A stain? I can't keep one single thing.
I know what you mean. That's just how he is, though. He's like, woe is me, my life is so terrible.
You gotta be kidding. This is unbelievable. I can't even get it. Oh, these are... It's green. Come on, lady. Will you move?
Yes, hello. Is this the Complaint Zapper Complaint Center? Yes, I have a suggestion. I think your Complaint Zapper is far too sensitive. As a matter of fact, I think it's a piece of junk, and I want my full... That's it. You're coming off. I'm done with you. Great. Now I'm going to have this thing on for the rest of my stinking...
I spend my life looking for these kind of things. It's a bit sad, isn't it? We've got to put into our lives, not just remove from our lives those things that hinder us, but we've got to put into our lives those things that are helpful. That's what actually we've been learning about a lot on this conference. You know, Philippians 4, whatsoever is true, noble, right, lovely, etc. Think on these things. We've got to develop those healthy spiritual habits. And again, it's not rocket science, is it? Time each day with God. When we were asking the regional team, what do you do? Time each day with God. Live a balanced lifestyle. Have time for fun. Time for your family. As well as the ministry that God's called you to. We can't avoid to neglect those areas of our lives. Sean said we've got to love ourselves before we can love others. And that's true. We've got to look after our spiritual and physical lives. So I want to ask you, what has the last year of ministry been like for you? Maybe you've had a year of great success and growth and fruit, a year of reaping, and it's been great. But maybe this past year has not been like that. Maybe this past year has been one where it's been really difficult. Maybe you feel like you've not been a good follower of Christ, let alone a good minister or church leader. Maybe you feel like you've been left behind a little bit in the race and others have passed you by. Maybe you feel like you've stopped running that race altogether. Or maybe you feel exhausted. Or in that race you've hit the wall. Or maybe you're walking but struggling to just keep on, keeping on. What are those things in your life and my life that we need to shed if we're going to finish the race, if we're going to persevere, if we're going to keep on? What are the things that we need to put in place to help us? You know, we're not immune as Christian ministers, are we, to the pressures that our ministries bring. We can show a lack of discipline at times. We can let our walk with God slip. We can neglect our family. We can have a bad attitude in our life. We can struggle with anger and hurt and resentment and bitterness and apathy. And those are the things that we're told here have no place in our lives. They're weights that slow us down in the race. We've got to get rid of them. We've got to replace them with the right things. To keep on keeping on, secondly, we've got to run correctly. Run with perseverance, Hebrews 12 says. People who do marathons don't just rock up on the day, do they? Who's run a marathon here? Look at that. 2 of them. 3 of them. You fools. But I don't think any of you, well, I know Chris, because see, when he was training for it, I knew Chris. There was training went on. I used to drive through Wexford and see this guy in all kinds of weather, slogging his way, running up the road. You train for it. You get ready for it. You don't just rock up and do it. And did you do that? Did you? Yeah. Really? Wow, mate. You're an awesome... Yeah. Can somebody take him out to the back, please? But most normal people, when they're going to run a race, they train. They rely upon discipline to get them through the race. You know, I don't think we like to talk about discipline anymore in church, do we? Lots of our churches don't seem to like the word discipline because it smacks of punishment. But actually, when we read about discipline here, it's speaking about training a child so that they can live a good life. Training a child so that they can protect themselves and know how to live this life in a successful way. You know, when we're doing these things in our life, putting in place those disciplines in our life that help us, it's about training for this long marathon that God calls us to do. C.H. Spurgeon, had to quote him, didn't we? Said, there are no crown wearers in heaven who were not cross bearers here below. I like that. There are no crown wearers in heaven who were not cross bearers here below. Our life, friends, has many difficulties. It's not all smooth sailing, and it might be this year, but I guarantee it won't always continue like that. It's a cross country, it's a marathon, it's got hills and mud and cobble streets, and make no mistake, there will be hard times that come along for all of us in this coming year, I'm sure. But we must persevere through the trials and through the setbacks. That's what we're called to do. We've got to persevere through the temptation. We've got to persevere through the persecution. We've got to persevere when we don't understand why something is happening, and we've got to persevere when we feel like giving up. We've got to carry on, even at those times where we feel like we're being left behind a bit. When we feel like we're being passed by those younger and fitter ministers. We've got to finish the race. We've got to run with perseverance. I read this quote. There's all kinds of things wrong with this quote, but I still like it. Triumph is just oomph added to try. You know, isn't it great? I like that. Finally, to keep on keeping on, friends, we've got to know where to look for inspiration. Hebrews 12, verse 2. Fix our eyes on Jesus. I remember watching Sir Stephen Redgrave training for his last Olympic Games that he did. I don't know if any of you saw this, but it showed you him training with Matthew Pinson and the other rowers. And at one point, he was on a rowing machine. And he rowed to the point where he passed out on the machine. Such was his commitment. And then when he really could have been called an old geezer by that point, couldn't he? Turned up and won a gold medal, and he was the captain of the team. What did it say to the rest of the team? This is the level of commitment. This is what an old geezer like me can do. Look at the example. Think what you can do. And it was a very successful Olympic Games. You know, we are called to look at Jesus, the one who endured everything that we do and more. Temptation, pain, disappointment, hurt, rejection, even death. But one who endured it all and won the race. He's our example. He's our inspirational leader. We're not running this race for ourselves. We're not doing this ministry because we want to do it. We're doing it because He called us to do it. We follow Him because He blazes the path ahead of us. And there are many distractions that will claim our attention. And we've got to remain focused on Jesus. You know, to fix our eyes on Jesus, as it's mentioned in these verses, it actually means this, and I love this. The action of one who, aware of other attractions, deliberately looks away to something else. The action of one who, aware of other distractions, deliberately looks away to something. Doesn't that remind us of the stuff that Sean was talking to us about? About deliberately focusing our mind and our thoughts? In this case, Christ. As Christian ministers, we're called, there are many things in our world that seek to grab our attention and our devotion, but you and I are called to deliberately, knowing that those things are there, acknowledging them, but deliberately look away from them to Christ and keep our focus on Him every day. Not let ourselves be distracted by the calling from other things to distract us from the calling that He's given us. We've got to keep the main thing the main thing. Not let anything come into our focus ahead of Christ. And because of His victory, we're encouraged to give 100%. I play league table tennis. I'm really good. Tom will tell you, I'm good at all kinds of sports. I used to hammer him at squash most weeks, many years ago. But when I got too old for squash, I took up playing league table tennis. I used to play many years ago. And last year, I averaged an 82% win rate. It's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah, in the seniors league. I'm at the moment this season I'm on an 81.4% win rate, so I'm below where I should be. Because I'm a bit competitive. I've got to have a better win rate than last year, otherwise I'm not seeing any progress in my game. That's kind of how I think. It just made me think about this. In this coming year, are we out to give a personal best for Christ in our ministries and in our lives, in our walk with Him? Are we going to try to be improving on our previous best performance? Not because of anything other than we want to do it for Him, because of what He's done for us. Christ and His cross are our motivation. His goodness, His grace, His love towards us are our motivation. He's our example. But I say, friends, without doubt, this coming year we must expect difficulties in our ministries. We all know that. But are we going to start off by intending to walk closer with God? In the midst of those things, keep our eyes intentionally fixed on Him. Because our adversary will do all that he can to try and stop us running that race. I dare to ask, will we all still be in that race next year? I pray so. But why don't we as a group of ministers at this ministers' conference say this is going to be a year where we encourage each other? We don't just meet up once a year, but through our fraternal gatherings, through our clusters, through the EMBA, through Baptists Together, we're not just going to look out for ourselves, but we're going to look out for that minister who's a few miles down the road, who I don't have as much contact with as I maybe should, but I'm going to try to connect with them and just say, how are you doing? Let's have a coffee. How's your walk with God going? And they can do the same for me. We can support one another so that we keep on keeping on. I'm going to finish with this story. One of the most memorable Olympic athletes of the 1968 Mexico Games was a marathon runner from Tanzania. He was called John Stephen Akhwari. This is him. He didn't get a mention in the record books. That wasn't the point. In fact, I would say it's fair that most people who were at that Olympics remember him more than the guy who won the gold medal in the marathon. But he came in last. Because when the race began and went through, the Olympic gold medal runner came into the stadium. He was welcomed to the cheers of all the fans. And then all the other marathon runners came in, except one. Akhwari was still out on the race, on the course, because he'd fallen over and he'd badly gashed his calf and injured his knee. And most runners at that point would have given up. But he picked himself up, as you can see. He made a makeshift bandage on his leg, and he very slowly continued to run the race. And during that day, all the other track events had finished, all the other Olympic events in the stadium had finished, and right at the end of the day, this one runner made his way into the stadium. Everything else had gone, and they were just waiting for him, and eventually he came in, and the crowd began to recognize who he was. They'd heard something of his story, and they stood and gave him an ovation as he came in, and he went over the line. Later on, he was asked why he'd continued running. And he said this, which is great. He said, "My country did not send me 5,000 miles away to start the race. They sent me 5,000 miles to finish the race." Paul said a crown of life waits for each of us who finish the race. But finishing is harder than starting. Finishing means running in, day out. It means training and discipline and keeping focused on the goal. But friends, we're called to finish the race. So finally, if we're going to keep on keeping on, we've got to reject that stuff in our life that causes us a problem, that hinders us. We've got to put into our lives those things that help us to persevere. We've got to run correctly, looking to Jesus as our inspiration and running every day. I pray that in this coming year, all of us will be able to live that life of faith with endurance, perform our ministries with that staying power, relying on Jesus for his help and for his inspiration, and that we all might determine to do our best for Christ and to support one another in the ministries that he's called us to. Shall we just pray together? As we do, I'm going to ask the band to come back up. Lord, we can only see a little bit of the road ahead. We can't see our final destination even. We can't even see over the next hill of our life. But we know that there will be ups and downs, high points from which we can see a long way, and valleys where we feel shut in. And Lord, some of the clouds may at times mean storms in our lives. But the great thing is that we've started the walk with you. We've started this race with you. Lord, thank you for calling us. Thank you for setting our feet on the way that you are leading us. Thank you for the map of the way, which is yourself. Lord, would you help us to persevere? Would you help us, Lord, to be the best that we can be for you? And Lord, would you help us to realize that we're not in this race alone. We have brothers and sisters. We have friends who will walk with us, run with us, support us. Lord, help us to commit, each one of us, to doing that for each other in this coming year, we pray. In Jesus' name.